So, if you don't know Brennan, Brennan is considered one of the world's best at using email marketing in a way that isn't super annoying and aggressive. So, Brennan's specialty is like listening, and then personalizing the emails, but still in an automated way so that people feel like his emails are speaking directly to them, even though on his side it's automated. He has written this up in his book, which is out now. This is personal. I
Out
just put
out
the
in
link.
6 days. Let me clarify that.
Oh, out
Out
in
in
six
six
days,
days.
so you can
Yes.
pre-order it now. Um, and I mean, like Brennan is like, I don't know. Is it fair to say you like created this category, or are you just the one who sort of
No, no, no,
mastered
no.
it?
I'm bringing it from the enterprise to
Okay,
regular people. Yeah,
nice.
or at least
And
trying to.
yeah, and why I think this is especially interesting, why I'm excited to talk about it today. Well, one, I'm curious how you made the book because you have been unbelievably successful with educational products in a way that almost no one else has been able to do in a very like systematized, handoff way. Course, ebooks, like workshops, high price point, low price point. You've done everything, and they seem to all succeed somehow. So I'm curious about that. And you've done it largely as an individual. And yeah, I know you have a family, you've got a million other projects, you're involved in software companies as well. So clearly, you're not just brute forcing this with thousands of hours. There's some sort of system and some sort of approach to the creation that's working for you. So with that in mind, and like against the backdrop that most books, most courses, most of these educational products don't work that well for the creator or the student, like why not? And what are you doing differently? What's the secret sauce here?
I mean, I think like okay, so really good question. First off, thanks for having me, Rob. It's been so funny tidbit before I get into things. Rob and I like grew up right next to each other, but kind of had the same friendish group. I don't know if you were maybe a year older than me, which back then would have been like you didn't really intermingle as much. But anyway, now we both live in Europe and we're from South Florida, so wild way things turned out. But anyway, yeah. So in terms of yeah, with that question, so I've had my like you mentioned, Rob. I've been doing some sort of like selling knowledge online for about a decade now. It started out back in 2012ish with what was my first online software business called Planscope. I did like a blog thinking that would bring in customers, and that product helped freelancers. So I started writing about takeaways I learned having built an agency, I have a web agency. So I talked about pricing and stuff like that, and that led to my first digital product, which we called info products back then, called Double Your Freelancing Rate, which was an ebook at the time. Sold it through a wonderful platform called eJunkie. I don't know if anyone here remembers that. But the so I've been doing, like you said, I've been doing something related to, I went from that to doing a cohort based workshop back in 2012, which it wasn't nearly as popular then, and I kind of had to figure out how to make that work back then. And then from there came out with a video course. And then in 2017, I started a new software business called Right Message, which is what I'm still doing today. And that led me down this path of getting into like personalization and segmentation and audience understanding, which then led to now Create and Sell and the book. And since the book, actually, now I'm not day-to-day running it, but I have an agency too that is helping people who want kind of we like the stuff you teach, but we don't want to bother learning it ourselves or hiring for it. Can you just do it for us? So
So
yeah.
at a high level, I've kind of heard that story from loads of people, but it's like, oh yeah, I made an ebook, I made an info product, I made a course, but you've been able to scale it to a tremendous degree, and courses you made 10 years ago are still flying off the shelves, metaphorically speaking, today. Like there's something like, do you have flops? Like, there's clearly something that goes into your
Yeah.
creation
Yeah.
process that makes these things work for the learner across a wide variety of formats. It's not like you have a comfort format and you're just doing the same thing over and over. Like you said, you've done every educational format, and now including, traditionally published book. Um, there must like, what is it about your process, the way you think about them as products, like the way you build them, like what's different? Because most of these is like, yeah, I sold a few copies, it's a nice bonus income. It's like, yeah, it's a little, it paid for the vacation. Whereas for you, I mean, you're doing like seven-figure educational products, and then you put them on autopilot and they keep selling somehow. Like, how, how do they work for learners? Like, what are you doing here? What's
Okay.
your
Yeah.
process?
Yeah. So I think one thing, and it's funny, I was in Mexico last week. I was speaking at a conference in Cabo San Lucas, and the one of the things that I talked about was kind of the teaching aspect, if you will. And then one thing that I talked a lot about, which is something I think most creators who are selling training or teaching should be doing, which many don't, is I think with a lot of people, you buy a course from them, right? And first off, I think a lot of creators, when they, especially now that there's like courses on creating courses that are prolific everywhere. I think a lot of us don't start with what I think is a lot more valuable, which is doing more smaller workshop based things first, just to get an idea of like, how do I actually teach this? What things am I saying fall flat? What resonates? What questions do I keep getting asked and so on? And then kind of doing that again and again and again to the point where eventually you're like, I could teach this in my sleep. And now I'm prepared to write a book on it or do a video course. So I think if you look at like any of my self-serve things like the book or my video courses, they've all been the result of a lot of live teaching. So I think that's one thing I credit to it, is just I never kind of go into a cave with an idea in a video camera and think I'm going to create something. I really like the idea of doing it as more of a dialogue first, and to the people who are attending, I mean, it's better because it's more personal, right? It's not going to be as necessarily generic as say a book would. So they get more value, but they end up paying more money because it's obviously a more premium thing.
So you're not doing the early teaching as like a pure for your benefit, free things just so you can learn. Those are also like you're selling those as profitable products.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Like at first, it a lot of it, when I look back, a lot of it started out effectively as glorified group coaching, and then over time, it kind of congealed into curriculum. And then, so I think that's a big thing. Is just be like not starting with the medium, not starting thinking I'm going to create a course or a video course or whatever, and instead think, okay, I've done this maybe one-on-one with people in a consulting relationship or as a one-to-one coaching type thing, and I've learned a lot about different domains and how they kind of understand and react to this kind of thing that I teach. And then you can then kind of scale it up into like a group format, and then it can eventually be more of a proper workshop, like what Robbie, you talk about a lot, which is a little more structured. And then from there, once you've again done like with before I ever created a video course for W freelancing, I had done 12 cohorts live over the span of about a year and a half of that material. So, the 12th cohort got the best teaching, but they also paid the most because at first I kind of, made it cheaper while I didn't really know what I was doing. And then over time, I knew that I knew how to teach it because I'd done it enough that I could, again, go in front of a camera and talk into the void. And I knew that what I was teaching was what people kind of needed to hear.
At what point through that are you like sure it's going to be a book versus a ebook versus a video course versus short form versus long form? Is that like a spreadsheet financial decision? Is there an obvious best fit for each piece of content? Like what?
Yeah,
Like
I
why
mean,
is this is personal a book instead of a video course? Is maybe a sharper way to ask that.
okay, so I would be lying if bucket list ticking was not on that criteria, right?
Right? Who doesn't want a book, right?
Yeah.
At some point.
So I think for me, like it was a bit of a challenge because I'd been introduced to Lisa DeMona, who is the agent actually who does all of Seth Godin and James Clear's book for James Clear at the minute and Seth Godin's books, along with a few others. So I got a really great intro to her. And this, honestly, everyone is the benefit of going to like events and conferences is I that connection would never have been made if I didn't meet people that way. So I talked to Lisa and I'm like, hey, I got in a call with her. And it was intimidating because I knew like she was responsible for the like best-selling book on the planet at the minute. And I'm like this guy like nowhere near James Clear's clout or anything like that. So she agreed to a call with me. And halfway through the call, she kind of shot me down because she's like, you're describing a technical manual And the people who read the kind of books that like publishers want, they tend to be either on one end of this kind of spectrum. On the one end, it's people who we might call entrepreneurs. So a lot of people who consume content, they don't necessarily, they're not always in the weeds as somebody who's like making a full-time living doing this stuff, but
Yeah,
they
like
they
books
love
that sell the dream, not the details.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then on the other end, you have like the quintessential executive walking through the airport, waiting for the flight, and then buys the book type thing. Apparently, like the people in the middle, those of us who are like full-time working, say, on marketing or doing this or doing that, we're not the target market usually for mass published books. So in talking with Lisa, she's like, this is not going to be, you want to do a book that gets picked up by a publisher. It cannot be technical. It cannot be training. It needs to be a lot different than what you're describing to me. So I kind of at that point treated this as a challenge. Like I'm a bit too analytical at times. I get, too geeky about stuff. And
Impossible.
and those of you who are on my newsletter will know, like I can go down these weird rabbit holes doing this stuff. So Lisa was like, you need to find a way to make what you want to say communicatable at a high level. So I then was introduced to a guy named Dave Moldauer. I can never pronounce his last name, Moldauer, I think, who he used to work at Penguin Books in New York. And his job was reviewing book proposals. So he's like, I'm an insider, or I used to be an insider. I know what publishers need to see. I know what they don't want to see. And left to their own devices, most authors are going to screw this up because they don't realize the book proposal is a sales letter and it needs to be saying the same thing or the right things. So I paid him to help me take what I wanted to say and distill it down into something with broader appeal. And then that led to the book deal with an actual publisher. And it did help, honestly, of being like, hey, I've got Lisa and Dave in my corner. That absolutely did help too. But anyway, where I'm going with this is the reason for the book. Oh, God.
If you had hit a brick wall with the publishers, would you have still done it independently, or would you have like was kind of like it sounds like a little bit like you wanted to play the game and find a way to win, and like you were looking for a way to make that happen? Is that true? Or were you like, no, this book's getting out there one way or another?
That's right. No, I think the fact that the publisher thing was a bit of a game, right? Because it's the thing about like when you're selling online and you have some semblance of an audience, you don't really have gatekeepers. You might have like a flop of a sale or a promotion or a launch, but it usually just means you didn't hit the targets you wanted. Whereas with publishing, it's like they are the gatekeeper. If they, let me just shut off Slack real quick. If they say no, then yeah, like it's one of those things. I think when you're your own boss, you're like selling to a lot of people. You don't really get that kind of thing as much as you would like when I was in school or something. And like, no, you are being held back or something, right? So I think
No,
part of it was like
you played
that
the
challenge.
game and made it work. It sounds like
Yeah.
you built the dream team. It reminds me a little bit of the way Eric Ries described his book launch, where he was sort of like approached it. Well, for him, the game was the New York Times bestseller list. And he was like, okay, like, how does this game work? What are the rules? Okay, the rankings are based on pre-sales with an ISBN number attached. Okay, the best way to get pre-sales is to do a book tour, but instead of speaker fees, people pay me in pre-orders. So he's like, okay, I'll talk if you pre-order 300 books. And he's like, yeah, like this is the way he described it, right? I'm not throwing him under the bus here. He's like, yeah, it's a silly game. I decided to play it, so I learned the rules and I exploited them, and so he launched it #1 in all the newspaper bestseller lists because he'd been like, okay, learn the rules, beat them, and he was just like, he's like, yeah, it's artificial, it's silly, but it enabled his like next set of goals, and he thought it was kind of fun to play. Meanwhile, I heard that and I was like, there is no way in the universe I am ever going to play that game. That is absurd. I would be pulling my hair out. But yeah, it's I don't know, it's fun. Nice. Okay, so you crushed it. You got the dream team. You got the buy-in from the publisher, and now you had to make a good book. So at this point, you got to cross the knowledge gap, right? You're faced with the curse of knowledge. You're super good at this. You're super comfortable. Like, how did you like get it to work for a reader who isn't as good at this as you are?
To be a bit of a fanboy, your book helped a lot with that. So obviously you have the mom test, which a lot of people know you for, but you also have a great book called Write Useful Books, which I really, really enjoyed. And I think a part of it was I kind of had to, even to go back to the mom test, like I had to think in terms of this is a book my mom would read, right? So if I talk about like custom fields, no, you're gonna lose her. So I had to make it a lot more story and outcome based, and kind of give the assumption that what I'm trying to do with this book is really sell the idea of personalized marketing and provide pointers in the right direction of how to go deeper, but not actually get into the weeds of it all. So I think that's like the thing that when working initially with Dave and then with my publisher, they kind of coached me through that to kind of rein me in and say like, you're going too technically deep here. Like, because what they want is they don't want a thing that goes outdated too quickly. I think we've all been like, I've had like back when I did like Flash and stuff, like, 15 or however many years ago, like the Macromedia Flash book in the bookshelf that nowadays is like useless because no one does that stuff anymore.
Yeah, and the secondhand bookstores still try to sell them. They're like,
Exactly.
yeah, you want a book about Flash or Adobe Photoshop 3.2. So
Right,
yeah,
right,
I
exactly. So
think you
it's the
could
same thing.
safely recycle that one.
Yeah. So I kind of wanted a perennial bestseller, not that it will be a bestseller, but like some book that has like long-term appeal, which meant
Hmm.
not making it to like talking about current tech, if that makes sense, which I think was good. Like, I think overall it would be a better book for that because I think I have the in-depth stuff, which you asked about the difference between when do I do courses, when do I do books, whatever. I really think the idea of a book is it's something that is first off priced low by Medium. I think it's hard to justify a book that costs a few hundred or more dollars. I've seen it happen, but usually it's within like 20 to $40 or something, I guess.
Yeah, you
Um,
get mean emails from people if you try to sell a book for too much money. I don't know, it's weird.
yeah, yeah.
You can sell a car for whatever you want if you're selling a used car, but you try to charge more than $20 or $30 for a book, and people yell at you.
Well, and that's the issue, I think, and that's why back when ebook selling was a lot more pervasive, back when I was doing W freelancing, right? The common advice that I'd get from fellow, we weren't called creators then, but people selling this stuff at conferences was call it a course and tack another zero at the end of the price. Boom. And that was kind of the going theory. And I think to a degree still is, because I think a lot of, I've saw a tweet about this kind of recently that was getting a lot of engagement. Like a lot of what are now talking head video courses probably could have been better as written, text. And yeah, I mean, sure, maybe some people learn better with like a, talking head type thing. But my rule of thumb now that I'm trying to pursue is if it's information dense, if it's me teaching somebody about the ins and outs of like say ConvertKit, that book is a horrible medium for that. If it's me, like I'm working on a thing now on segmentation that involves there's some kind of presentation-y stuff like me in front of a slide deck, but also visuals on screen recordings course. But for something like this, I think book was the way to go. And I do think if I would have got rejected by all the publishers, eventually I would have self-published this. I don't know if I would have had, I mean, to be honest, like the like timelines that publishers give you and kind of like not knowing like, shoot, if I screw them over, am I like blacklisted forever? It made me really dedicate the time to write the thing. And I think if I didn't have those pressures, I don't know. I don't know if it'd be coming out, next week.
Interesting. Cool. So a couple questions jumping in here. So Jason, you want to jump in? Let me find you so I can pin you.
Yeah. Hi.
Hey,
Good to see you, Brandon. And obviously, Rob, I've been on the useful books train for a little while. I was just curious to hear a little bit more about like the agent process and how you feel like was Lisa sort of like, hey, I'll work with you. I don't like where you're going with this, but you could prove me wrong, or was there like more selling that you had to do to kind of like, you sort of jump to the part where you're like, hey, I'm going to work with a publisher anyway, but there's a whole, you just did it. Was it just working with that guy helped you get the sale through the door to the publisher?
yeah. So I think like I'm pretty positive. Again, I can't go back in time, but I'm pretty positive if I didn't hire Dave to help me like convert what was in my head into something a little more well thought out, I don't think I would have been able to continue with her. So she does have high standards, rightfully so. Like, so yeah, I don't know if I would have gotten, she basically said like, it was very, she's really nice. So I don't think she would have said it directly to me, but you could kind of tell she's like, get this better thought out before you come to me. And that's why I ended up hiring Dave to do it.
And do you think, did it make a better book, or did it just get the publishers convinced? Do you feel like it actually helped you?
Yeah, it did. Yeah. Cause I think like the thing about, and it's probably frankly more of a me thing than maybe other people thing, but because the way I think, like, I don't read a lot of nonfiction books, to be honest. Like I read a lot of fiction books. I don't have a ton of patience usually for business books. So I don't always know, like my concern was always a lot of them that I've read are very fluffy, I think. Like there's been books that I've read that could have been a blog post or an infographic. And so I was really concerned about like, if I didn't make it technical, if I didn't get into like every chapter's like full to the brim of like, you implement X, Y, and Z and massive results, then I felt like that would have been failure for me.
Right. So but having sort of the pros on your side gave you some confidence to maybe go away from your natural instincts. And
I wrote a much more marketable book that is more useful to a wider array of people than if I would have gone at it alone. The presupposition that you would have already drank the Kool-Aid would have been kind of there, you know, and it would have only appealed to a certain subset of people.
It's interesting to hear different authors, how they respond to the same thing. I remember April Dunford saying that the publisher said almost exactly the same thing when she was shopping Obviously Awesome, her book about positioning around. And her response was like the polar opposite of you, because she like got real mad at the publishers, and she's like, I'll show you, I'm going to make it even more technical and detailed. You know, and she ended up with this like incredibly niche book that sold like hundreds of thousands of copies, because people were like, wow, this is like just what I needed. But you know, I guess since you already have the courses and the emails, well,
I haven't sold hundreds of thousands of copies of this book, so I mean, April,
you will mark my words.
One up on me.
I'll see. We'll loop back in a month when you're when with the mom test with my first book, the early months. I think the first month I sold like 50 books or something. It's like it was really slow to get started, and then it like. I don't know. I was like, I guess it failed. And I like ignored it for a couple of years. Then I'm like, where's all this money in my bank account coming from? And like, I went back and looked at the Amazon data, and I'm like, wait a minute, you know, it's selling lots of copies now. What's going on here?
Was that lots of copies just later on, not out of the gate, right?
Yeah, it was just like, it was the slow roll of word of mouth, right? And I'm sure that if I had read your book first and been a bit more proactive about my marketing, I think I could have accelerated that a lot. But as you say, if you write something that's like, has the shelf life of a shelf, right? It can last for a while instead of expiring.
Well, I think like, so I was talking to Tiago Forte, who wrote Building a Second Brain, and his Para Method book that just came out. And he's very analytical, and he was looking at kind of the trends of like most books when they hit peak popularity. And I think for me, and I think for a lot of authors, I'm so obsessed with launch week, because launch week is actually all pre-orders, including launch week. So it's like this massive week that that's like what you're saying about Eric, like, you know, do all this pre-sale stuff that all counts as week one sales. So, you know, I kind of have been a little probably too focused on that. Whereas Tiago was looking at all this data, and he's like, on average, it takes 3 years for a book to hit peak popularity, based on like all the numbers he ran. And I don't have it on hand, but I can share it with you if everyone wants to see this like screenshot.
I'd be super curious, because I'd be curious. I'm sure that's true for like a certain subset of books. Like if you looked at a certain subset of like back catalog successful books, that rings true. Certainly there's been some like New York Times nonfiction bestsellers. They peak super early on average. But then all the money comes from the books that don't peak early, like the books that are these slow burners. So if you look at the profitable books, or you weight by profitability, absolutely true. If you look at just like what's on the bestseller list, I don't know, they flash in the pan, most of them.
Well, I'm looking at like apparently Subtle Art by Mark Manson took 2 years to peak.
Hmm.
Bullet Journal Method by Ryder Carroll. That was 1 year. Getting Things Done by David Allen was 5 years later is when
Yeah,
it got.
and all of these books that you're mentioning, like if they keep selling for a year, they're probably going to sell for 10 years, and then
Yeah,
they're probably going to
exactly.
sell for 20
Exactly.
years, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like one of the things I like to do, I mean, I've only done 3 books, right? So it's not like I have like an infinite archive of wisdom here, but I try not to look at my sales data for the first 3 months on Amazon because it only psychs me out. And I kind of want to see the performance after the launch peak. Like I want to see if like in month 4, in month 5, in month 6, like
Yeah.
has it fallen off a cliff and is zeroed out, or like at that point is it growing? And then I can kind of like ignore the first couple months. Like, is there a launch spike or not? I don't really care. And it's like I really like if it's growing in month 6, then I'm excited, even if it's a very low absolute number, because I'm like, all right, that car's running, right? Like it's
Yeah.
gonna get somewhere eventually. But I don't know. Maybe that's just my resistance talking, where I'm afraid of the objective failure of a flop launch week. But so Alistair, I see your questions, but let me come back to them in a minute. I want to talk more like the rest of the business and the process and your time, because you like we've been talking in the Modern Author Useful Books course thingy about like writing in public and starting to build like a minimal but useful author platform. And already it's like, whoa, there's a lot of things to think about. There's a lot of moving parts here. How do you fit all this into a day? I'm like working on a book, I'm writing, I'm revising, I'm doing beta reading, I'm like, hanging out with my family. I've got a day job. It's like, um, it seems like you're able to like finish a product, make it good through this iterative process you described, but then also build some kind of like automations or systems around it so that it then continues working for you forever.
Mm.
um, and they all seem to fit together even when they're not on exactly the same topic. Like you've got your stuff about doubling your freelance rate, you've got create and sell, which is about email marketing for freelancers, you got the stuff, you've got a number of lists. I like look at what you're doing and I have a panic attack. And yet every time you seem so like last week you're like, yeah, I'm just in Mexico in a pool, look at me. And I'm like, I'm doing like a tenth of what you're doing and I'm losing my mind here. So what's your process? How is it all like systems and email? Is it like, are you like the Zen master of the universe and it's some sort of mental kung fu? Like what's going on with your process, your mindset, your tooling, your approach to allow you to do so many things and have them feel like they're building towards somewhere and not just like one book, then the next book, then the next book.
Okay, so I've kind of my early stage, of, I guess, of the career was on the double your freelancing side, and in full transparency, I still own that, but I've basically hired an operator who runs that for me. So my involvement there is about a once a month call, so I'm not as like that's not a huge thing for me anymore. On the create and sell / write message / this is personal book side of things. That's kind of the focus now. And I do look at it as all being super complementary, because if like Write Message is software that implements what I teach in both the book and on Create and Sell, I have courses on Create and Sell that kind of augment what I teach in the book and so on. So I see that all as being super complementary. And my thinking here is that, okay, so I need to do 2 things. I need to kind of evangelize the idea of personalized marketing, but then I need to equip people with the right tools to actually execute on it. Because what I don't want to just do is just hype things and be like, figure it out. Because I think a lot of what frustrated me early on about the whole like personalization thing is that there'd be a lot of advice out there on like personalized marketing is going to be the big thing in 2020, and then 2021 rolls around, it's going to be the next big thing. But no one would ever talk about what that actually meant, about like what is it, what does that actually tangibly mean? So how I see myself currently tasked is I need to think, how do I get people in under the guise of saying, I can show you a way, given no additional growth to your audience, to basically make your content more relevant to each person, which in turn will make more people willing to do business with you, which means you get more success from them buying and giving you money, and you get more case studies and all that good stuff, right?
Okay, so that's like the unifying high-level promise. You're saying you don't need to grow your audience, you can get more value out of the audience you've already got, and I'm going to show you how. So that's like the top
Yes.
level, like
Yep.
unifying, this is what I do, and then there's a bunch of ways you can learn that from me. Is that
That's right? Yeah.
correct?
Yeah. So bring them
Okay.
in that way. And I actually, one thing I do to kind of practice what I preach is I segment everyone who joins my audience. By everyone, I mean, I get about an 85% response rate, which is the majority, almost overwhelming majority of people are sharing with me what they're currently struggling with, a bit about their situation, how deep down the rabbit hole they were already gone, business type, and so on.
So
So
hearing
yeah.
that, like, what is that? Is that like an extra, like, select one of these options when people give you their email? Is it you like following up to their sign up with like, hey, can you tell me who you are? I know you do a lot of like personal stuff, a surprising amount for someone who with such a big list, but like if I'm an author and I'm new at email, or I'm like an indie creator launching my first product,
Yeah.
like what's
Well, I can tell you what I'm about to do for the book. Well, let me tell you about how I do that, and then I'll get into the book thing. So when somebody joins my list, either on the Right Message side or Create and Sell side, I have a very simple multiple choice survey that you just click buttons. It's not fill in the blank. It's not anything like that. And I ask people like, what's the main objective right now for you? Is it building your audience? Is it selling more? Is it automation? And then I kind of ask follow-up questions around that. And that's done immediately at the point of opt-in. And again, about 85% of people who opt in complete that, which is great. Like I get a lot of really great data then piped up to their new record in my database. So one thing I'm doing, I'm about to, I've been using that data for my other stuff like the courses and pitching Right Message and so on, but I haven't done it yet for the book. But what I'm planning on doing, which is I've been beta testing this in person. So I did this when I was in Mexico last week. And I was at another conference a few weeks ago where I tested this, where I was at the event and I would talk to people about my book and I'd find out a bit about who they are and what they need help with. And then I would recommend a specific chapter for them in my book. So what I did at these events is I actually brought copies of my book and gave it out for free. But I'd say like, here, Rob, I think on page 75, where I talk about onboarding new subscribers, you're really going to like it for X, Y, and Z reasons. So my plan is now that I have this information about like the kind of personas that people fall into on my audit, on my list, when I promote the book, it's not just going to be like, hey, check out my book at launch today. Instead, it's going to be, you shared with me that your current struggle is on audience growth. Well, I think you're really going to like what I cover in chapter 3, was for these reasons, right? And that's kind of like one of the ways I'm doing this is I've kind of, when I was in Mexico again, I was giving this talk and I thought about things, I came up, we're all looking for our own lingo to use, like that just makes things a lot more obvious. And I was talking to people about how some people there do high touch sales. So they get on a phone call, they are like, hey, let me dialogue with you to try to sell you on hiring us. And then others do low touch sales. Like I have a book, here's my sales page for the book. I have a course, here's my sales page for the course. And I'm looking at this as like middle touch, right? Where it's not high touch in the sense that it's a dialogue, but it's kind of like I'm listening to what people are saying at scale. Like, oh, you fit into this profile. So I think you should check out my book for this reason, rather than just telling people, check out my book. It's like almost like a product recommendation type thing that I'm doing there. So yeah, I don't know if that made some sense, but that's one of the things I'm about to roll out this week, actually.
That's really nice. And I think it feels doable. Because I sometimes I like collect data and then I look at the data and I go, that's interesting, but I don't really know like what action that's going to drive differently for me, right? I guess it keeps me up at night. But being able to say like, oh, this is the best excerpt for this person, or this is like, because one of my, I guess everything's a compromise. Like with books, I know with your emails and stuff, you'll like swap out the example you use in an email. So you'll have like 4 examples of different industries and people will get the example that's closest to their industry, which is super cool. And obviously you can't do that, or I don't think you can do that with a book, maybe unless you got a trick. And so my kind of like hack solution has been to kind of try to keep a super like as concrete and specific of a reader profile in mind as I can imagine, and like write just for them. So it's kind of like if I have 4 of these like types of people who answer the survey, it's like, well, the book's got to be best for one of them. So I'm like, I'm going to write primarily for that person. And then it's like, it feels super personalized for them. And then for other people, they're like, oh, well, I can learn from this adjacent industry. But at least like it's nailing it for someone instead of being lukewarm for everyone. It sounds like you're doing something a little bit different, or maybe you're thinking about your book differently, where you're like, there's best pieces of the book for different types of people, and there's like, that's okay, there's multiple entry points, there's multiple sales pitches. Is that fair, or like, are you thinking about it differently?
I'm thinking about it. So you know how you read a book sometimes and you're like, this one chapter paid off the entire like reading of this book, right? And
Sometimes
so
one page, if it's like
yeah,
the page you can actually use, you're like, wow, all right.
yeah. So that's what I'm trying to do is I'm not trying to tell people like just only read this chapter.
Hmm.
Instead, my thinking is, okay, so the people reading the book, some of them will they're going to have different struggles. I mean, the fact of the matter is, no matter how niche you might be, you're going to have people of different levels of experience. People like we're working with a client now who he's got a massive audience, and he's split down the middle between half his audience wants to follow him so that they can become influencers and like build their own audience thing. The other half are purely pragmatic and they're like, I just want to build an audience to make money. But it's almost like a 49-51 split, right? So like, even though he's got a very focused thing, you still have different underlying motivations. You still have different like stages of business or whatever that people are at. So with this, it's more like, I'm not trying to say, pick up my book and read it. Read this chapter and then ditch the rest. It's more like, when you go to like a bookshop and they have the little handwritten, I recommend
Hmm.
this book for this reason. Like I want
Right.
to do that.
Hmm.
And that's how I kind of look at this.
Uh, That makes perfect sense. I heard Buddy was telling me he runs a little business and they'd hired a new executive and he's like, the dude had come in from big businesses and now he's working in this little startup. He goes, oh, you got to read this book, and the executive came back, after the weekend. He goes, why did you make me read that? That was a total waste of time. And my buddy explains, he's like, oh, well, what I thought like is interesting about it is, and he basically added a paragraph's worth of framing, and suddenly the dude's whole demeanor changed, and he goes, huh, let me reread it and get back to you. And then a week later, he was like, oh, that was so useful. And it was like that critical piece of framing that like translated the book into his worldview was enough to turn him from a detractor into a super fan. And they were able to start implementing it and doing things. So, okay, interesting. I love it. That makes sense. Um, and then what about the systematization? So you've talked a bit about like how you build the thing, like start in person, start inefficient, like start face to face if you can, like learn what works for people, iterate the thing till you're confident, then lock it down as some sort of product. Cool. You've talked about having them being like under the same umbrella, so they're working toward the same goal or promise, so that you get some overlap, where someone might be a customer of multiple of your products, or graduate or move up. But then, like that's a lot of moving pieces. Like your time, your systems. Like what was a day like when you were writing the book? You wake up, you write for 2 hours, like you write a bunch of emails, you build automations. Like, does it all happen simultaneously? Do you do 2 months of something, then you're like, okay, I finished the book, now let me systematize the marketing and the outreach? Like, how do you fit this together?
I mean, I didn't go into monk mode or anything to write the book. I still had a day job, which is doing Right Message. And so I was still doing plenty of stuff, while I was writing. And I kind of treated it as a bit like, I'd already been on that hamster wheel of writing for doing my weekly newsletter. So I just looked at it as like, I'm doing two newsletters, one, which is my one that goes out to my list. And the other is like another few pages of the book. And if the book came out, I think to be about 60-ish thousand words. So, do aim for 1,000 words every week. And I mean, sometimes I was a bit more inspired, especially during like COVID time where lockdowns couldn't really do anything, where I'd knock out like, 1 week I knocked out about 10,000 words in basically a few days, which is a good chunk of the book. So yeah, I mean, I didn't have the luxury that a professional writer had, in that writing is not my full-time job. So I had to kind of balance it between the other stuff. And that is why I started the process in 2018, 2019, I think. And now it's 2023 and it's actually being released. So it was slow moving.
Okay, yeah. So it took a minute, but
Yeah.
you just kept kind of chipping away at it. And as the book, now that it is imminently launching, as you mentioned, it comes out in 6 days.
Yep.
Is the when you're thinking about like the promotion and setting up emails, I know you do some live emails where you kind of write them and send them the same day, and they go out each week on newslettery stuff. And you have some that are kind of pre-created, they're in drip campaigns or automations or whatever. What's your like flow for this? I assume you're writing live emails now, or has everything been created months ago and it's all just kind of going out? Like, were you
So
doing this stuff while drafting it, or was it like, okay, it's off to the proofreaders, now I can make some marketing materials? Like,
I mean, so the I didn't start any of the marketing of the book until the manuscript was out of my hands. So I didn't actually like the website for the book is actually relatively new. Um, I it was definitely done in stages, right, or phases where wrote the book, delivered it to the publisher. They then spend months doing whatever, formatting it or something. um, and that's when I got into the okay, I need to go and like partnerships and stuff like who in my audience, who in my network is gonna help promote this. Okay, I need to get a book website done. I need to figure out how do I incorporate the book into my email list onboarding because I want to use the natural growth of my own audience to keep the book, being it's going to be a lot easier, I think, for a new subscriber to buy a book from me than buying like $1,000 course or something. So
so
yeah,
can I push into details on that? So
yeah,
you've got a newsletter,
yep,
people are signing up for it. Like,
yep.
what do you mean when you say like hook the book into that? What does that look like
Okay.
practically speaking? Is it there's like a section that goes out about the book in the first email people receive after they sign up, or there's this whole complicated thing, or like
Yeah.
because loads of man, I remember Penelope Trunk when she was blogging a lot and doing all this like amazing unschooling, like crazy anti-career stuff that was like so fun to read about. I remember she once wrote this rant where she had hundreds of thousands of blog readers and newsletter readers and like zero book sales. And the rant was basically saying that she makes more money by promoting other people's books and getting the affiliate commission than trying to sell her own book to her own audience. Eh, and she's like,
That's just like audience misalignment, or why was that?
I mean, I don't know. Like, you tell me. Like, I don't sell to my own audience really. Like for me, I'm 100% reliant on word of mouth and referrals. And part
But
of
I'm
the
sure people do
reason
buy your book because they're on your list and they find out about it that
I
way.
haven't sent an email in like 10 years.
Okay. Right.
It's like pretty shocking how suboptimal I am. Like, like
Um,
I keep building lists and then deleting them because I'm like, well, I got 5,000 people and I haven't emailed them in a year, so I guess I'll just delete this. I don't know what to
okay.
do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And part of
So
the
I don't
reason,
do that.
yeah, no, I know you're smarter than I. No, but the reason I do is because I look at the list and I'm like, I don't know how to talk about my book in a way that feels respectful and aligned. I don't know how to talk about it in a way that feels like time efficient for me, that allows me to move on to the next book instead of feeling like I've become like taken on a marketing job that I never wanted in the future. So
Yeah.
clearly there's like something time efficient about the way you're doing it, where you're like, and respectful, because I mean, you like people, it's awesome to be on your email lists, right? It's like, oh, I'm so excited he told me about that. Like you're doing something differently in a different way that I think every author should be doing. And I'm trying to pin down exactly what that difference is.
Yeah. Okay. Let me see if so there's kind of two questions, right? There's the what is it about the content that might be different, and then the second thing is more of a technical question about you asked about like the welcome sequence and what that actually means. So let me start with that, and then we'll get into the content. So when somebody joins my list, somebody mentioned up above in the chat, like, is the survey required? When you join my list, I ask on the following page immediately after opting in, hey, would you mind sparing about 15 seconds with me so that I can better give you what you need? I get about 85% of people who see that page completing the survey. You're free to close the tab. I mean, the other 15%, that's what they do. That data is then synced up to my email platform, which is ConvertKit, and attached to their contact record. What I then do is I have a personalized welcome sequence that takes what they've shared and basically explains how being on my list will help them with the current challenge that they're facing. And that is an automated sequence that's life cycle based. So it goes out relative to when you joined. You go through that.
So for that, you're basically saying, like, let's say it's 5 emails and you wrote each of them 4 times, so that, for example, so that there's like different.
For each need. No.
No,
So
okay.
the you can do it that way, which is I guess the easier way to do personalization. But what I'm doing instead is I'm having microcopy adjustments using again, not to get too technical, but there's a way with a platform like ConvertKit to do conditional content within an email. And that's basically what I'm doing is like, you see this paragraph if you struggle with this problem, otherwise you see that paragraph. So it's the same email, but the content effectively changes. So yeah, so they go through the sequence, and then what I do is if you're on my list and you get an email from me on a Tuesday, that is not a live email. The benefit of having done this stuff for about 2.5 years to this list is I have a whole catalog of stuff that I've already written that somebody new will not see. I want them to see it though. So what I've done is I've said, okay, they're kind of effectively 3 core personas of why people are on my list. And what I do is when you join my list, say your focus is on automation, for the next 3 to 4 months, and this is growing, every Tuesday, you're going to get an email from me, which is one of my best of articles that I've ever written about automation. So on Tuesdays, you get automation related content. On Thursdays, so tomorrow, is my live email. When you see a Thursday email from me, I probably wrote that morning at a coffee shop. So that's how I do things. Is my workload, if you will, for Create and Sell is I show up and I write 1 article a week, but then I'm really sending out a minimum 2 emails a week, potentially more depending on how recently you joined. And that's how I look at the machine, if you will. I could get to the point where eventually I have such an arsenal of content, and a lot of my content doesn't really change. Like it doesn't expire. I'm not talking about like world news or anything that changes day to day. So I could basically say, okay, just Tuesday newsletter, or I could make the Thursday one even automated. And I could kind of, I hate to say it, but like kind of check out if I needed to, because those newsletters, one thing I'm doing in them is I do have calls to action. So you mentioned about how you don't promote your book. We'll get a shift to the content thing. You don't promote your book in your emails. I want every email that I send, even if somebody ignores a call to action, that they should think it was worth my time to read that. Right. So I learned something new. I've got the right ideas are flowing. And I try to make it so if, again, I don't like the whole like sell the sizzle and then put the steak behind the like expensive curtain type thing. I want my emails to be valuable in their own right, but I do include soft, passive call to actions for my products, soon to be including the book in that, in these emails, either as mixed into the content itself or as a dedicated area, effectively in the footer of the email. And that's my plan. And that's how I've sold Master and ConvertKit and my other stuff, and even now Write Message on a passive basis, where my thing is I just show up to write content. The promotions for those products are personalized based off what somebody shared with me and what they bought. So if you bought Master and ConvertKit, you're not going to get pitched it again. That would be silly. I don't have that luxury with the book. So what I've done now is if you click the link to the book, this will change once it's released. But at the minute, if you click the link to the book, I don't know if you pre-order on Amazon because they don't give me that info. So what I do is I wait 2 hours and I send an email saying, hey, did you pre-order? If so, would you mind clicking this link and attach a screenshot of your pre-order or your receipt here? And I'll send you a bonus. And that's my way of tracking like who's bought. And yeah, so that's kind of like how I plan on having a customer ledger, if you will, for the book, or at least trying to. It won't be perfect, but yeah, that's the thinking there.
Okay, I see how this fits together, I think, and how you have not gone crazy. So start in person, like even if it's small, like iterate as you get more confident in the material, you're like formalizing and productizing. As you launch the thing, you're doing live email marketing. And you're able to like borrow your list from previous products and previous launches because they're all under the same umbrella, like the same kind of big promise or goal. And after you've done that live thing for a while, you're able to start reusing them as automated evergreen things and then you can step away from it and move on to new projects. Mm-hmm. And that's your empire.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. I want it to be a giant choose your own adventure story where people self-select when they're ready for the product that makes sense for them to buy.
Cool. Amazing. I love it. So let us take some questions. Alistair asked what you would do differently, I guess with the book, if you were starting again. So, somehow you lost your only draft and you were, restarting today. Any changes in process or thinking?
Rob, do you know Josh Kaufman of the Personal MBA? Yeah. So we were at a conference once in Philadelphia and we were just having drinks after the event. And
I don't know him like that. I know him like his name is on a book I've read.
Cool. So anyway,
I know of him.
He and I were chatting. And one thing he did that was brilliant and I didn't do because I was a bit scared to confront the publisher about it, to be honest, is he basically put in his book, like, hey, if you read this book and you want to get like some videos attached to the book that extend it, email your receipt to book at personalmba.com. He literally just set up Zapier to say when an email hits that account, add them to my email list and send them an email. And that's how we built his list. And then you see this a lot. Like, I think a lot of nonfiction business books that have effectively like an upsell behind, like a big course or mastermindy type thing or whatever, they'll have ways of getting out of the book and onto an email list. I did not do that because I would have done it if I was self-published, but I was like, I don't know. I felt weird going to the publisher being like, can I just, promote my stuff? and I wanted the book again to be like valuable in its own right. It's funny. I ran a conference a few years back for W Freelancing. And I remember having an attendee at that conference tell me once, like at the end, they were like, I was kind of surprised because I was expecting like an upsell or something. Because I think a lot of conferences can do that. The conferences I self-select to go to, never. The conference is the product. So that was just a divergence of like worldviews or whatever. But I think like a lot of people are now kind of assuming that you get into the book as lead gen, basically, for the author, who then you get pushed on their email list and then they sell you the really expensive thing. But I didn't want to do that, for better or worse. And again, if I could go back, would I have done that? I don't know. I would have probably had I wouldn't have treated it as Legion. Instead, it would be more of a, value first kind of thing of like getting people out of the book and onto my list. But
like these, like the extra bonuses, like getting people out of the book. Lauren asked whether it's through a QR code or some other way. I think, Lauren, the answer is like, however, like some authors literally just print the email. They're like, email this address if you want, I'll send you the bonuses. Others say, go to this reasonably short URL. You can look at the way, 3 that do it really well, if you want to find examples, are Atomic Habits, of course, because James does everything well. Nir Eyal's Indistractable or Hooked, and Ryan Holiday's Daily Stoic. These aren't necessarily endorsements for the book, although, I do like them all. But the way that they move people, like in the book, like in Daily Stoic, it's like, hey, this was a book's worth of Stoic anecdotes and meditations. If you want one of these a day for the next year in your inbox, here's how you do that. With Nir Eyal's books, he said like, hey, there were like 3 chapters that weren't able to fit in this book and we had to delete them. If you want those extra chapters, go to this place, put in your email and I'll send you the chapters we had to remove. Like for James, it's the easiest thing because he's like, you want accountability, building those habits, you bought this book to build. It's like, it feels very natural. And I think other places where it works is when there's a good reason for like that you couldn't teach it in the book. Yeah. So for example, Never Split the Difference did a great interview about the book, Chris Voss with Anna David. And he said one of his regrets about the book, although it sold like 3 million copies, so he can't have that many regrets. But he said they didn't use the back matter and the front matter well enough to bring people into a relationship with them. They didn't give them a reason to leave the book. And I think that one was such a missed opportunity because there's a very good reason why you'd want to hear a negotiation teacher performing a technique on video. Like, you can't get that through the book. So it feels really bad if someone withholds something they could have put in the book. Yeah. But like Chris couldn't put his voice in the book. He's like, he tries to describe it. He's like a late night radio FM DJ. And I'm like, I do not know what that means. Like, I need to hear you say it. And if on that page, he just had links to like YouTube videos of him like doing the voices, I would have been right there, And then from there, if he wanted my email and he was going to send me like vocalizations of all the exercises, 100%. And it wouldn't, but if he was like, I'm withholding this secret knowledge until you give me your email, that feels terrible,
Yeah. And I think if I would have made the book more of a full-time job, I would have probably come up with those resources to put in. I just didn't do it.
So something interesting Nir told me is he'd expected, like originally he did the show me your receipt and I'll like send you the bonuses, but eventually he removed that because he found that a lot of people were downloading the bonuses first once he opened it up, and then the bonuses were convincing them to buy the book. And he found that like both things were promoting each other. The bonuses were selling the books to new customers, and the book was getting people to sign up for his list through the bonuses. So he's like, why in the world would I limit that? He's like, all right, have the PDF. Great.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can do this stuff like if they do click the link to the Amazon listing from your email, you could then like hit them up and say, hey, did you buy it? Yes, no. And like get a review or something if you wanted to. That's another thing you can do too. I plan on doing this is if they do indicate that they did buy, a month later, have an automation goes out to them saying, hey, would you mind like filling out this form and leaving your review? I mean, obviously you could push them to do it on Amazon and stuff, but I'd love like, a video endorsement or something. And I'm using a tool called Senja, which is a great way to collect video and text-based testimonials. And that's my plan, is to, I have an indication of who probably bought, at least if they're being truthful. And then at least I can communicate them and ask them what they thought.
Love it. Yeah, I've been surprised how powerful just like the occasional follow-up email is. It's like, hey, just checking in. Did you try it? Did it work? Are you stuck on something? Can I help? And suddenly it like unblocks so much. And then, I've gotten a lot of both like someone's like, oh yeah, and by the way, I have a huge podcast. It's like, oh, well, that's convenient.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not doing it for that reason, but it's surprising how often you get lucky with that stuff. So we are at the end of the hour. We can wrap here, Brennan, or we can keep on rocking, depending on how you feel.
It's up to you. I'm game.
Okay, nice. Then we've been short on questions. So if we can stick around till 1:15, then we'll have some time for extra questions. And if there are none, then you and I can reminisce about Florida.
Perfect.
So who's got some questions? Jump on up, raise your hand, or just start talking, and we'll get you spotlighted.
I got a question, Rob, from
Hey, Alistair, good to see you. It's been a while.
Good to see you. Yeah. So, Brennan, my question is just about short books. I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on like books that are 35 to 70 pages, like 8 to 12,000 words, that kind of thing. Because I've heard people talk about those in a derogatory way, like this could have been a blog post. And then I've had other people, including publishers, say this is what people are looking for. So this is like in the business how-to kind of section.
Yeah, I mean, I think so Tiago's new book, The Para Method, is super short too. I don't know the exact word count, but I think there is a distinction between at least a book. You're probably more likely to take action on a book than you would a blog post. So I think the format does help in that case. And yeah, I mean, I think again, I don't know enough about the world of publishing, but my understanding is always that they have like a number in their head of word count, and they've always been like, it needs to be this. Like if you want your book published, it needs to, fit this range. And that's why I think a lot of business books that could have been shorter ended up being so long, because they had to kind of stuff it. So
this is finally starting to change, but not every publisher has gotten the memo, because there's been some big successes. Like there was a series out of Oxford University Press called The Very Short Introduction. So it's like the very short introduction to physics, the very short introduction to Epicureanism. And those books killed it. And but they're like, I think what makes them work is you don't feel cheated when you buy them. Like you don't buy it and they go, wait a minute, it's short. Because like the whole branding is a very short introduction to. So there's alignment of like promise and content. Like if you buy a book and it's like this thick, this was actually made by the community. One of the community members is awesome, David. But like this book is about saving time as a busy founder. So when you read it, you get it. You're like, oh, thank God, it's 50 pages. That's amazing. like it's like the size is really aligned with who it's for and the promise of the book. And he's not like, they're not hiding that on the Amazon page, but like, and it feels good. Like, I don't know. You can tell when someone's just padded the thing out with a bunch of giant font quotes to make it feel like a book, even though it's a blog post. That feels shitty. But like, to me, it's like craft and cohesiveness. When a thing was made with love. And if it feels like craft and cohesiveness and that's the right size, yeah, like I love to have my time saved. But yeah, man, some publishers are a few years behind. Not all of them. There's great ones and new ones coming out. Michael, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, hey, I put my question in the chat because it's a bit of a weird one, I will say. I've been asked by a publisher who is like in IT education. I'm not, for starters, I'm not in IT education. I'm in the fluffy advertising creative side. And they want a book around NFTs, which is about 20,000 words. And like, that's kind of not necessarily the book I want to write, but is it acceptable, reasonable to like do that book as a sort of like process learning exercise to then get to the book that I actually want to write? Or is that just ridiculous? So yeah.
I don't know how to answer this, Rob. I'm going to put it on you because I've only done one book and it's not even out.
So there's nothing that mysterious about writing a book and getting it onto Amazon or like to a publisher. Ultimately, it's a PDF with certain formatting, right? So, and like there was a post on Hacker News where someone was like, I've decided I want to write a book. What's the software? What's the platform? What are the tools? And like they were really annoyed that it's Microsoft Word or Google Docs. Like it's not about the tooling, it's about doing the work. So I wouldn't say there's not like mysterious secrets about the process that you're going to figure out. However, like you need to build the writing habit. You need to get comfortable like hearing that your book is confusing and seeing where people get bored and abandon as a data point instead of discouragement. So there's like some emotional learnings and some habits that need to be built. If you find it, like some authors find it, they get a lot more resistance than they to have because they're writing about something they care about so profoundly, and the caring slows them down from the learning. Like trying to do it for the first time when you care so deeply can kind of get you tripped up in your own shoelaces, because you don't allow yourself to make mistakes, so you don't go anywhere. So if you have that personality type and you want to pick something that you're a little bit more distant from just so you can get your reps in, that would make sense. Or if it's going to be easy for you and they're giving you an okay paycheck, or it's going to look good on your CV, then like, why not? By all means, right? But in that case, I'd say like, don't let it take over your soul. Like see it as a gig that you're like getting done to the best of your ability in this many months and like moving on with your life, right? It's like, you can't care about someone else's book the way you're going to care about your own, because you'll lose too much time and go a bit nuts. That's my opinion. We
No, I
did.
appreciate that.
Yeah, very welcome. We actually we're pretty far, Devin and I, into doing something similar with a big company when they basically wanted someone to write a series of books, like basically documenting their very interesting cultural processes. And we were like, we could do that. And we kind of quoted them a crazy figure because we're like, it's worth us setting aside our other projects if you will let us write the book on the terms that we defined. And to our amazement, they said, yeah. And then they ended up having some trouble with their IPO they had planned, and there was a big executive changeover and the world fell apart. So like it didn't go through. But it's like, we're like, this isn't our book. We don't care. But like, if you'll do it under these terms, then we do care a lot. So like, fine. And like, it's okay to be a bit mercenary in these situations, because they're going to get someone to write a book on that topic with that spec. So like, yeah, try your luck.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Thanks. Appreciate that. And I just want to say just very quickly, Rob, Montest was one of the business books that I was recommended when I went through a startup accelerator program called Collider many years ago. I read the Montest, and this was like 10 plus years ago. That was through Devin. So
oh yeah, nice. Yeah, that's great to hear. And man, like that book is like selling more copies now than ever, right? And it still talks about Skype calls. That's how outdated it is. And it's like, it speaks to aiming for the back catalog and try not to date yourself too much, as Brennan was talking about. Nice. Anyone else? What's on your mind?
I had a question actually. It's amazing to be on this call because 2 years ago, I think it was during lockdown, I definitely understood the value of segmenting. So I do personality profiling. And so in my head, I was like, I can profile, do you know what I mean? Like segmenting my email list based on their personality traits. And it's just so much value. And I got on Active Campaign and I tried ConvertKit and I literally lost the will to live about the complexity of it. And I'm 3 years in, I've just created a product, basically online courses. So it's a bit like I've reverse engineered it. I've created the courses after having done the workshops the last 2 years. And now I've got great courses. I don't have an email list. And I wanted to avoid going to conferences and wasting loads of times of speaking until I had a really cool call to action to create an email machine, right? So I'm kind of like, I understand the system, but I was very much blocked on the segmenting because it just became far too complex. And gave up. So I'm going to get your book, obviously, and get some insights. But for me, it was very much, yay. It was very much like the tangibles, right? Like I used Active Campaign. It was more expensive, but they had a guy on chat, right? And it helped. Yeah. I used Kajabi because they had, someone on chat to help me. I now know how to create websites, but their email's not great. So the actual tangible detail you're talking about is actually what I need. But finding it's just been really, really hard. And I've tried to pay freelancers and they just charge you a fortune and they sell you stuff you don't really need, or you still have to come out with all this stuff. And it's just, yeah, I don't know. Like, I want to read your book and understand like where to start on the plan, but ultimately I also need to hands-on like do it. So I don't know if you've got any
So
advice on how to make small
not to
steps.
promote my own stuff, but if you, I don't know if you're on Create and Sell, but if you do join, that's
On what,
my email
sorry?
list, createandsell.co.
No, I just joined the other your
Okay.
business.
So I do talk technically, like I get, if you, especially if you say you're wanting automation help, I get
You're
deep into
perfect
that, like
client.
the technicals of like, how do you actually store data in ActiveCampaign or whatever in a way that is gonna work for what you need it to do.
Right.
So yeah, because you're right. I mean, that's the issue. And I think that's actually something I've been thinking a lot about is like, there's a lot of like, it's been forever since I've been at university, but like the, the 100 level classes or whatever, like the beginner stuff.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the information targets them because the majority of people are kind of aspirational. And there's not a lot of people out there, I think, who go more intermediate. And I've always, I excel there because I don't like talking about like motivational stuff as much as I do like, if you do this, this will happen and here's why. So yeah, I think it's the content's out there. It's just a lot harder to find, but yeah. I mean,
because when you're on board with these platforms, they ask you all these questions. And I have no, I know that question is important. I know that decision will make a massive difference to my business, but I have no idea, what the labels are or what's going to be creating a really complex system versus if you use these tags, it's a lot more simple, to manage and avoid errors. So I hear that's the create and sell. Is that correct? Yeah.
That's my list. And I
need to go into that and actually intermediate, because I'm happy to do it myself because I think there's power and control, that stuff. Otherwise you get freelancers telling you $2,000 here, $2,000 here, $2,000 here. And I spend so much money and I wasted so much. I've learned right from it that I need, that I need to educate myself. But I just decided create the product and reverse engineer it. I now am ready to like market it soon. So I need to start building a list, but I just
so can I sort of piggyback on Lauren's situation and ask Brennan, if you were talking to just imagine a hypothetical overwhelmed author, who's got their weeks feel busy already and maybe market, like what's like the 80-20 of getting started? What does version 1 of laying the foundations for a sensible email list look like, or email strategy, assuming you don't already have a list to piggyback off of?
Yeah. So, well, okay. So technically have a landing page at a minimum with some sort of what we used to call autoresponders, but like welcome sequence attached to it. So you join the list. And then something that lays the foundation of like, here's how I can help you. Here's a bit about like my background and how I'm qualified to help you. And here's what you can expect. And I think something as simple as that, where then you just send a broadcast email once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever it might be, where like when I initially did Double Your Freelancing Rate more than 10 years ago now, I pre-sold it. And my email list came from not wanting people who pre-ordered it to just be kind of in the lurch while I maybe wrote the book. So what I did is I just wrote every week about what I was writing. Like, hey, this week I finished up this chapter. Here's what I learned about it. Here's like, I went down this path instead of that. And here's why. And the beginning of my email lists, the very first email list I ever had was literally just updating pre-orders about what I was doing. So I was paranoid of coming across as like, I've got your money. I'm going to just run away down to the bank. So I think like something like that, if you're an author, building kind of in this like public, but private public, where it's just your own audience, your own list, getting people who like, I've largely been doing that with Create and Sell. I've been sharing like sample chapters and sample material and stuff, and kind of using the email list as a platform to experiment with what I wanted to write about in the book. So I think especially if you're an author, I mean, it's well worth your while to do that.
I love that, because what that does for me is it reframes it from I'm going to build this list to try to sell my stuff to people, which feels like very against my, I don't know, just way of being. And it changes it to like, I'm going to support and update and stay in touch with the people who want to buy my stuff. It becomes like a customer support and like staying true to your promises thing as opposed to a marketing and a salesy thing. And I think it's also nice, like one of the let's say procrastination patterns that I occasionally see in creators, authors, everyone, is they're like, yeah, I want to build the product or the business, but first I have to build the audience. And I'm always like, you're going to delay your business by like 3 years while you like get Twitter famous. That doesn't seem correct to me, but it's hard for me to explain why. And so I love what you're saying because it just cuts through that excuse. It's like, no, like start selling the thing or start like sharing the thing. And it's like, then support the people who care about it. Yeah. Right? Like, yeah, it's like that feels like the answer for authors.
I think I think very few of us actually want to get more email. So the idea of like, I'm going to start an email list and people just want to join it is
yeah.
So I think if you can plant a flag in the ground and say like, I'm working on this book or I'm working on this thing, and this is the opinion that this product is taking. And if you share this opinion, if you want to be a part of this journey with me, here's the best way to learn about it and like, you know, help me make it the best thing possible. And I think that's something I think Nathan Barry, I forgot the exact place he said it first, but he basically said that like with the whole audience first product thing, he's like, even if it's not even a product that's ready yet, just write the sales page, get like plant that flag in the sand of like, here's the stance I'm taking. Here's why I think you're going to really be interested in it. And then if you want to find out more, drop your email. And then it becomes more of a focus thing rather than like, hear from Rob, like who wants more email, right? Like, so.
Yeah, especially for me.
Yeah.
No. It's funny, like there's so many, you end up with so many emails as a byproduct of launching a book. And I just didn't know what to do with them. Cause like when I was doing pre-orders, I would do pre-orders through Gumroad, or I would have people like go purchase on whatever, a Shopify thing. And I'm like, okay, I have these emails now, but it's like, it feels inconsistent to start sending just random newsletters and stuff. And then also beta reading, like I end up with loads of emails throughout the beta reading process of people who clearly care about what I'm working on. And then the book launches and I'm like, here's the book, talk to you never. And it's just like,
here's
like how wasteful, right?
Well, so maybe we could close on this. Like one thing that I think is really helpful would be, so you have a lot of people who bought your book. The percentage though, unfortunately, who probably fully read it and applied it fully is probably not as high as we might want, right? So you have their email address. So one thing you could do is when you get really great, like, here's a success story, somebody who, you know, had this understanding, these, you know, pushbacks, these whatevers, here's how they applied, say the mom test, or write useful books. Like, here's how they actually did it. Here's their story. I talked to them, I interviewed them, whatever. Like that might be the thing that I need to hear to finally say, okay, I really need to give this thing like a proper reading now and do it right. So I would look at it as like, if you can say, I as the author, the book is immutable, right? Like once it's out, unless a new edition comes out, it's not changing. But there's a community of people like you who join the book because they're probably like you. I as the kind of organizer, if you will, / author, I can take their stories that they share with me and distribute it to people like you who could probably benefit from that. So that's how I would look at it, is like, you're kind of the ringleader, if you will, and you can get these, you know, it doesn't, I think a lot of people get confused about success stories is thinking like they need to be like, I've now built $1 billion business thanks to Rob. No, they just need to be like, hey, I'm not there yet, but I finally overcome this imposter syndrome, self-doubt stuff that I had going on. I've incorporated the business and now we have our first few customers or something. And that might be what somebody like me needs to hear, whereas somebody else might want to hear like the bigger story. So I think if your job is just saying like, I've created a movement with the mom test and I have a lot of people who share that movement, who really like the book. Some have acted, some have not. I want to find out from those who have acted how I can share their story with others who could then benefit from what they've learned.
I love it. It's easy, it's natural, it's helpful, and it's repeatable as well. I always am like, there's a scent to marketing that requires you to keep coming up with genius new ideas. It's like, oh, that sounds like it's going to be hard to maintain. But if something's like, get stories, tell the stories, that's going to help people, that feels repeatable to me, right? I want my marketing to be boring so that I can like crank that wheel and do it without having to like rely on some sort of genius inspiration every week. So This was awesome, Brennan. Thank you so much. And congratulations on having the book out. Everyone should buy the book. This is Personal. You can pre-order it now. It comes out in 6 days. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can buy it right now. You should do it. Brennan's the best. And you should also absolutely hop on the createandsell.co newsletter. It's where I learned about email marketing and kind of understood like how it works, what the moving pieces are. I don't do it very well because, I'm kind of lazy with it, but still, it's like the bits that work, getting my book launches going. It's all thanks to Brennan's advice. So thank you, Brennan. I'm so happy this book's out here.
Sure.
Any closing words of wisdom or requests or things to do for us?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like I'm pretty available. So if you want to, my email address is just brennan@createandsell.co. So if you have like further questions or whatever else, just drop me a note.
Yeah. And if you take Brennan up on that advice, you will see his amazing process in action. So subscribe to his email, his list, then ask him a personal question. He will reply to you, and then you will also see your experiences of overcoming that process or that problem in a future email newsletter, right? So this is an example of turning
if it's structured. If you do the survey, if you send me plain text, it's not.
Yeah. if you do the work. So it's like it's like turning a member success story, right, into future content, help other members, and then the flywheel rolls. So amazing. Okay. This is Personal. Go buy it. And thank you, Brennan. Hope to talk to you again soon.
See you, everyone. Bye-bye.